Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Miss King's World, and today I'm going to show you how to make a wig. I've been making all my wigs for a few years, so I'm super excited to show you guys how I do it. I start with two types of pins, these straight pins, as well as these hair pins, and these are super important to hold down the wig cap, a curved needle, as well as thread. And this is a thicker thread that I get from the beauty supply store. This mesh cap that I didn't end up using, this band that I got from Amazon. I actually like bands better than the clips because I do find that the clips rip out my hair, and I find this makes your hair sit better. And of course, Shein hair, guys. Can you believe it? I have my first review up above, so make sure you go check that out. But this is the mesh cap, and this is normally what I lean towards using, but it just kind of fit weird on my head. So I went with this more stretchy cap, and I absolutely love it. I find that my wig looks straight and sleek, and it fits nice. And of course, you need a wig head to make this on. So first I start with my frontal, and I use the thicker hairpins just to pin this down to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. The thinner pins are nice for when you're putting in the tracks, but the thicker ones, just to help you keep the wig cap down, are super important. And this frontal, guys, is so bomb. I'm actually doing this voiceover a few months later, and the frontal is still looking poppin'. So yeah, definitely check out that review. But I actually got a friend to bleach this. They said the knots bleached wonderfully, so that is not something you need to worry about. And I'm just fitting this over the wig cap just to see the placement. And I find the placement of a frontal is super important just because this is pretty much how you lay your foundation is how it's going to sit. So it's very important that you get this part correct. And I kind of figure out where the middle of the frontal is, place it on the wig cap, but also the mannequin head. And then I kind of figure out where exactly to place the back of the frontal. So super important, you see that there's a band around the bottom perimeter of the wig cap. And I personally don't like to sew on that because I feel like if you do, you kind of limit the amount of stretch that it has, and it could end up looking or end up fitting too small. So I never sew on that bottom part of the perimeter, and I never sew on any of the seams because that will also restrict you. So the back of the frontal, what you're seeing, is right below the seam. It's not on the seam and it's not on that thicker band, it's right below. And it's super important to have that space, that gap that you see in the front, because that's what's gonna allow, when you put the wig cap on, that's gonna sit nice and flat. And leave a little bit extra on the sides. That should be a little bit extra because that's where your band is going to be sewn onto. So I usually sew my band onto my frontal so that everything sits nice and flat. So that is key. I hope I'm making sense. And yeah, I do take time making sure there's enough space. And then what I do is I go ahead and start sewing. Now that I've figured out where the placement is, have a little bit extra on the sides, and then I go and start sewing. And I try to get as much of the frontal on the cap as possible, but I also leave quite a bit, if you could see. So I'm gonna start sewing, and I think one of the most important things is to create knots in between. So just in case, a thread comes loose, or someone is yanking on your wig and who knows, maybe something comes and cuts the thread, your weave is not flying in the wind while you think you're being a hot gal and there's tracks falling off. At least if you put knots in between, it will allow the wig, even if some things or threads do come loose, it's not completely loose. So I'm gonna show you how I actually tie it close up. So as you can see, go through, loop the thread around, and pull it. So simple. This is kind of what I use to sew the entire hair. I prefer doing a needle and thread over glue, but just loop it around and then pull it through. Super simple and easy. And then also make knots as well. So right now I'm just making a little bit of a knot. That way you see how I actually do the hair. So I do this throughout. It's not every other stitch is a knot, but every few stitches I do make sure I add knots. So when you get closer to the seams, super important that you do not sew on the seams. That will limit your flexibility with the wig. So I go over the seam, as you could see, and that's how I do all my wigs. Then I try on my frontal with the wig cap and see how it sits. Once I know that it sits properly, then you can go on and do the foundation. So I measure my head from ear to ear and I draw fake ears on the mannequin head as well as the back. I have 2 lines in the front. Ignore the top line. I use the bottom line because your head isn't shaped like this mannequin. Why do they make them so skinny? It actually makes no sense. So then I line up the cap based off of my measurements. Obviously, this mannequin head is super basic. It's not going to have your measurements. And I pull down the cap all the way to that line that's right above the eyes, because that's where the front / middle of my head would be, the top of my head, essentially. Because like these shapes of the mannequin heads are so weird. So I pull it all the way down. Be super careful when pulling on the frontal. They are made of mesh. They are fragile. And you do not want to rip your frontal. Like that is the last thing you want to do. Then, because I know the frontal at the edge is going to sit at my ear, I pull down the wig cap down a little bit over where my ear would be. That way I give myself, again, a little bit more space and flexibility. And then I do that the same on the other side. Trust me, you do not want to make a whole wig and it's too small. Nothing is worse than a too small wig and it's uncomfortable and it's too tight and it gives you a headache. I've done it before. It is the worst. That's why I try to avoid sewing on the seam and on that front band, because it's honestly the worst thing. So as you can see, this kind of would mimic more of a head, as opposed to if I had actually used the wig head the way it is, then it's going to be a weirder shape. And even the back, you're not going to be able to like sew the back. So this is my 26-inch Shein hair in body wave. Yeah, this hair is just bomb, guys. I can't wait to do a follow-up review. So stay tuned for that. So this is how I'm going to start. Just making sure the back is tight. That way I'm able to sew properly without having to like it move too much. And again, laying the foundation is the most important part. So these are the parts that you want to take your time on. It took me probably, I would say 30 minutes at least to kind of get this correct, because this was my birthday wig and I was not trying to look crazy. So yeah, I want to do it correct and do it correctly the first time. So I'm going to lay the track right above the seam, and that's where I'm going to place it. Also, I like giving myself that little extra room with that band at the back. And then remember too, you are going to be sewing on an extra band. So if you see that little piece that's kind of hanging a little bit, that's for your band from Amazon that I got, the brown band that I showed you earlier. So yeah, I'm just going to place that, and then I'm going to start sewing and using the same method that I used for sewing the frontal, making sure I put the knot in, making sure I loop the hair over or loop the thread over the needle and kind of do that. So yeah, that's essentially how I do that. But like I said, laying this down is probably the best way to get a good looking wig. And sometimes I'll even take this off and see how it fits now before I even continue, to make sure I'm in the right place. But then when I get to the end of the track, I never, ever cut my tracks. I find that it makes it like weird if you cut it. One, if you want to reuse the hair, then you have to figure out what piece goes where. And also, I just think that like when you cut it, it just tends to just shed more. So I always fold it over. Once you go to the end, just kind of fold it, use the pins, pin it down where you want it. I think another important thing is creating even spaces. You could be a little bit more gappy at the back if you don't have enough hair, and then be a little bit closer, but you don't want it to be super spacey in the back and then super tight in the beginning. It will definitely create that illusion that your wig doesn't sit as nice. It's going to be heavy at the top and sparse at the bottom. You don't want that either. So I try to make it as even as possible, and I just keep sewing. So this is how my hair looks with 2 packs in it. I used 3 packs in total, but I thought this was important to show you that once you start getting a little bit closer to the front, I leave a little bit more of a gap there. That way you can sew the front hairs from perimeter to perimeter, as opposed to once you sew, you kind of sew in the middle, and then once you get a little bit closer to the top, you don't have to leave too much space, but enough space for at least 2 to 3 tracks. That way your hair sits nicely, because that back part is going to look a little bit more bulky. You do want tracks to sit as smooth as possible. So it's important to have longer pieces at the front so that your hair looks smooth, especially with straight hair, wavy hair. If you have curly hair, it's not so much of a big deal, but I find that this does make your wigs sit as flat as it could be. Just starting with the perimeter at the back, doing a little bit longer strokes, and while you get to the middle, doing the layers a little bit smaller, and then leave really big gaps for the front. So Kim Glitz has gifted me some items, one of which is this flat iron, and it is so bomb. At first, I was a little bit intimidated by this because it's so big. She has different sizes. I got this size, but I absolutely love it. I haven't worn straight hair in years, and this flat iron, it's so easy to just go in and flat iron your hair in literally 5 minutes. So I will leave the links down below to her Instagram. She specializes in short hair here in the UK. So make sure you go check her out and check out her stuff. So yeah, guys, this is the final product. And honestly, I was absolutely in love with this hair. I haven't worn straight hair in years. So it was a pleasant surprise how good this looked. And honestly, Shein is coming for the girlies next. So yeah, if you guys like this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Like I said, I'm gonna definitely do a follow-up video so you guys can see how the hair is wearing and tearing. And I'll see you guys for another video. Bye, guys.